Hello and welcome to another episode of our Brothers Creed podcast, where we talk about motivation, experiences, and exploring the world around us. We're the Thomas Brothers. I'm Ethan.
I'm Jared, and today we're going to talk about the samurai code of Bushido. And we're talking about some samurai stories. Really, Bushido was a creed for samurais. And so as a Brothers Creed, we always talk about creeds and adopting those good things from those creeds in history or current people's creeds. So we thought it would be a great topic to cover. We got some great stories, as well as we're going to attempt to cover thousands of years of history. So it's going to be fun.
All right, let's do it.
Let's do it.
Spartans! What is your profession?
Any man who must say, I am the king, is no true king.
What I do have are a very particular set of skills. Skills that make me a nightmare.
If I can change, and you can change, everybody can change!
Let us all unite! Let us fight for a new world! A decent world!
Okay, so when we start talking about samurais, it's we have to start with a little bit of historical context and understand exactly what samurai is. So samurai literally means to serve. That's what that word means. And so Japan, when we're talking thousands of years ago. Japan in its early years was simply different groups of clans of wealthy landlords, and these clans began to fight each other over really 20% of the land in Japan that is fit for farming. So it's kind of a scarce resource. So one of the powerful landlords named Minamoto Yoritomo and his army challenged the central government in 1192, and this was known as the Japemi War. And after he won that, he was like the biggest landlord. He won it, and that was when the 700 years of samurai. That is so long. I mean, when we think about, I think sometimes in America it's hard to think back that far because our context, doesn't even go back that far. 700 years.
It's like 250 years.
Yeah, I mean, like countries like what 1776 till now. I mean, that's not. But we're talking about 700 years of a certain way of living. So anyway, that's a long time. So there's tons of history there. The country went through a period of division where each state, became independent and they warred against each other. Eventually, in the 1500s, the country came back together, starting the Edo period, which lasted until about 1867, which is kind of when the samurais died out, or that way of life was done with. The samurais were highly regarded individuals and were at the top of the caste system, followed by farmers, artisans, and merchants, respectively, in that order. Isn't that interesting, though? I thought it was so interesting that warriors, farmers, artisans, merchants. I would think that in today's society, merchants are almost at the highest. We value merchants like businessmen, entrepreneurs. Yeah. That is so highly valued now.
I would say
farmers
I'd say like warrior is almost at the bottom. The bottom,
in some cases. What was it? Bloomberg. He was like, oh yeah, farmers. You just got to learn how to. Anybody can farm. All you got to do is get a seed and just put it in the ground and put water on it. It's that easy. Obviously a lot of farmers took offense to that, but it's, that attitude towards farmers is so bad. But I thought that was interesting how they had their caste system. Like warriors protect the country, and then they had the farmers, the people who were artistic, and then at the end, people were making money.
Yeah, one and like you said, it spans over so many hundreds of years that it's like it really evolved. A couple facts that I had. First of all, a lot of times I feel like, there was like a myth that they were like few and far between, right? But there was actually quite a lot of samurai. It said at the height of the samurai reign, right, over 2 million armed samurais were roaming around the island of Japan. They made up roughly 10% of the population of Japan. They were an entire social class, and they were the only social class that were legally allowed to possess a sword of any kind and carry a sword on their persons at any time, which was kind of interesting.
Yeah. So I guess one step higher than the samurai would be the daimyo, or I'm not sure how to say that, Daimyo. These were the feudal lords that the samurais served. And so when you didn't have a samurai, when you were a samurai without a master, you were considered a ronin. And there's a story about the 47 ronin. I think there's actually a movie about that with Keanu Reeves, right?
Yeah, but I think it's kind of it's an interpretation.
Yeah,
of the story.
Essentially that story. I briefly looked at it. It was about like some samurais who their master was killed, and so they kind of laid low for a while, and then eventually they came back and they got revenge on the person who had killed their master, and they slaughtered everybody in this house, and then they all had kind of revenged their master, and I think they all committed suicide, and like a ritualistic suicide.
Yeah, it's called seppuku, which I have a little bit on that, but we're going to save that for later or get into it now? We save that for a little bit later.
We can save it for later. Let's talk about, so I wanted to end here. So the Endo period ended in 1867. Now, this is when the kind of samurais died out. Can you tell us a little bit about, and there's actually a movie about that that's, from what I read, is pretty historically accurate, called The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise.
Yeah, so The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise, basically, this is 1867, so it's not that long ago. Basically, the Emperor of Japan wanted to become more of he wanted to westernize Japan. And the samurai class did not particularly like this westernization of Japan. And the emperor at this time, he was young. He was a pretty young guy, like maybe in his like mid-teens to late teens. And he was just really infatuated by the Western culture and everything else. So he created an army, and he paid different Westerners, in some cases Americans, and from some other countries, basically to come out and train his army in military tactics and shooting guns and cannons and everything else that was historically kind of like a more of a Western to Japan, I guess, not so cultural. Because the samurai, basically, they were known for their weapon, which was the katana, or the samurai sword.
Yeah, but I was actually doing some research on that, and they used all kinds of weapons, like spears, bows, and arrows. And they did use guns occasionally. They were mostly on horseback, but I think most notably, you think of a katana or the samurai.
Yeah,
with the katana. Yeah.
So basically, there broke out a war between the Emperor of Japan and his army, and the culturally pure samurai that wanted to keep the culture as pure as possible. Obviously, when you have samurai with swords and arrows and stuff like that going up against artillery and cavalry, they didn't fare as well, and they were eventually killed off. But the movie actually goes into one of the Western leaders or generals that was hired to train the Japanese military, got captured by the samurai, and basically lived with them and learned their code of the Bushido and the respect, and gained a massive respect for him, and actually ended up becoming an honorary samurai himself, which was kind of cool. So it's a good movie, The Last Samurai.
What is it when you say honorary? What do you mean by that?
Well, I think it's because typically when you have a culture like that, you have to be Japanese to become samurai, but there are certain instances throughout history where foreigners have been given the title of samurai. I know that I don't have their names on me right now, but there was 3 Westerners that actually did become samurai in history. And I know I'm pretty sure there's other instances where that had happened, but it was very, very rare.
Interesting. One of the cool things about the samurai is they often gave their swords names, and they believed that it was the soul of their warriorship. So they had a lot of meaning in their swords. And I was actually looking into this because so this is kind of deviating a little bit, but during World War II, the government of Japan made a ton of swords. They weren't like katana type swords, but they made a ton of swords, and they gave them out to different generals and things like that. And some of these people, some of the Japanese that went to war, they took their old family swords and heirlooms, and they took that to war. And at the end of the war, we said, hey, everybody turn over all your swords. And they did, and they were under the impression they were going to get these back because they tagged them with their names and who they were and where they lived. But unfortunately, many of those never made it back. And those precious family heirlooms that had been around for centuries, in some cases, never made it back. Now, I can understand. I kind of see it from both sides. One side, I see it from like the American side. It's like, well, we came and we conquered you, and you handed over your arms, and now it's ours. But I also see it from their point of view to say we're like, this is part of this is not necessarily a piece of war so much as it is art. But again, they were beheading people with those swords. So it's kind of,
it's like family heritage. Yeah.
But it's something that's part of your, like if you had a Luger or something like that, that's, well, I'm not going to use the Luger. If you had a 1911 that your grandpa used in World War II, and you took that into the World War III, and then you were forced to, it's just not even comparable because it's not thousands of centuries old, or hundreds of years old. But
it's still sad. Yeah, I mean, it's still kind of.
But anyway, very few of those. In fact, there was the emperor apparently of Japan, and at that time. There were some soldiers who were from samurai heritage and some who weren't. And the emperor sent his family heirloom, his sword, over to the U.S., but apparently it was lost. It was lost in a shipwreck or something like that, and so no one knows where it is. It's like a very famous samurai sword that he sent over that nobody knows where it is.
That's worth some money.
It's probably hanging on some sultan's palace in Dubai somewhere.
Yeah.
Up on his mantle.
So getting into it a little bit, we wanted to talk about this, basically this code of ethics and morals that these warriors lived by. This was called the Bushido. Bushido, there's 7 virtues of Bushido, but just to give a little bit of background on Bushido, it's important to Japanese soldiers to become Bushido is a general equivalent to a code of ethics and morals for warriors. It's basically the samurai originally, actually, this is kind of interesting because of the long history of the samurai. The samurai were actually, it claimed that they were like an evil fighting force when they first started. But Bushido very quickly created this fighting force that followed a very clear code of ethics. And so it was kind of like, almost like some ruffians that became these very good warriors in the original samurai, but then as they evolved, they started to live by a certain code of ethics. As it grew in influence, actually, most of the people in Japan became this Bushido became a common belief and was respected by everyone, not even just the samurai, but everyone. And it's kind of interesting. I just wanted to read through some of it says that some of the responsibilities of Bushido. And it says, I'll just kind of read through them. Samurai are to obey their lords. It is a samurai's right to speak out on bad judgments or orders, but death is the only alternative to fulfilling an order. So if you don't fulfill an order, you die. Samurai must be ready to die at any time, and death in the service of one's lord is the greatest service one can render. Dishonor to lord or family is dishonor to the samurai. No dishonor can go unavenged. All debts, both gratitude and vengeance, are repaid. Cowardice is dishonorable. The study of martial arts and literature must be practiced at all times. Drunkenness, rudeness, and lewd behavior must be avoided. Lawbreakers will not be hidden in any domain. Daimyo,
that's the masters.
The masters must expel any samurai charged with treason or murder, and samurai are to live frugal and simple lives. Those are kind of like some, I guess, responsibilities of those who are living this Bushido lifestyle. And what's interesting too is you can kind of look at. I saw this thing on, it was like Facebook or something the other day where it was in like Germany or in like Italy or something, and somewhere where tons of people travel. And they had this big poster board, and it basically you would pick a little sticker, a little round sticker dot if you were from a certain country, and you would put your sticker on this poster board, to say, oh, I'm from the United States. I'll put my sticker on this poster board, right?
Yeah.
And it had like the U.S., Australia, England, Germany, Spain, wherever else. And basically, there was just tons of random dots put all over this thing. But in the one for Japan, all the dots were they were like almost in perfect lines, other than like 2 or 3 other dots that had been there. And so it's just interesting. It's just like the culture is a lot more precise, and it's a lot more. I don't know if I want to say respectful, but just from what I've seen, it's just
orderly.
Yeah,
maybe.
It's very orderly.
Yeah,
which is really kind of interesting. I feel like kind of some of that comes from this.
Yeah, I had a friend from work go to Japan, and she brought back some stuff from Japan for each one of the members of the team, and it was like, she's like, oh yeah, the care that they took to package up this. It was like a cookie or something like that they, and it was like the care that they took to package this up and to put it in, and put the bubble wrap in, and then put it in the box. It was just so much care that it was kind of cool. I thought I was impressed by that. One of the things I was reading about the Bushido is that actually over the 700 years, it changed. It had changed and ebbed and flowed, and sometimes it was more like aggressive, and other times it was more like philosophical, and it had just and sometimes it had gone out of vogue and then back in, and then people were like really obsessed with it, and people were not.
Yeah.
And the government kind of a little bit changed it to mean something a little bit different. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But let's go through. We have some stories to share, but let's go through some of these tenets here, and then we can maybe share our stories intermittent throughout those.
Yeah.
I'll do the first one. So the first one is called Gi, and these are the 7 virtues of Bushido. So this one is integrity, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it's Gi. So this one is as be acutely honest throughout your dealings with all people. Believe in justice, not from other people, but from yourself. To the true warrior, all points of view are deeply considered regarding honesty, justice, and integrity. So this is kind of a war. You could say that a warrior makes a full commitment to their decisions. So that's integrity. That's the first one.
Interesting.
The next one here is respect. So REI. So Ray maybe. True warriors have no reason to be cruel. They do not need to prove their strengths. Warriors are courteous even to their enemies. Warriors are not only respected for their strength in battle, but also by their dealings with others. So you could say that true strength of a warrior becomes apparent during his difficult times. So I like that one.
What's the third one?
Third one is you, YU, or which means heroic courage. So hiding like a turtle in a shell is not living at all. A true warrior must have heroic courage. It's absolutely risky. It is living life completely, fully, and wonderfully. So heroic courage is not blind. It is intelligent and strong. That's kind of cool.
Yeah. Was the next one honor?
The next one's honor.
So the next one's honor. Mayo is maybe how it's pronounced. A little bit of the research I've done into it. It's basically to live and die with honor is very important to the samurai. Everything that they did was honorable, which meant that they did everything with what they believed was with honor. And it's kind of like, that kind of goes back to the example you just gave of like they were sending a package and they just like were very meticulous and took kind of pride in their work.
Yeah.
It's almost like even if you're just a packer, right? A package sender or whatever, you take honor in your work. You take pride in your work. It's almost like an honor to this is what I do. I'm going to do it well.
Yeah.
What is it? Does it say anything additional on the?
One of the things that's cool is it says you cannot hide from yourself. So
Yeah.
having that honor and that integrity is so important. The next one is compassion.
Okay.
Is that one that you? Oh, it says through intense training and hard work, the true warrior becomes quick and strong. They are not as most people. They develop a power that must be used for good. They have compassion. They help their fellow man at every opportunity. So you could say, if an opportunity does not arise, they go out of their way and find one. So compassion. Jin is what that one is.
Cool.
Jin.
Was the next one honesty?
Honesty and sincerity.
So honesty and sincerity is Makoto. Honesty, as they believe that being honest is everything. Being honest in everything gives you respect and means that you can be trusted. Being honest basically breeds being trustworthy, and that honesty was very big in this culture of, there's really no reason to hide or to lie about certain things. Just be honest. Honesty is the best policy, and I think that's pretty cool.
One of the pieces I like what it says here. It says, when warriors say that they will perform an action, it is as good as done. Nothing will stop them from completing what they say they will do. They do not have to give their word. They do not have to promise, because it's just going to be done. I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah. And the last one,
speaking and doing are the same action. That's kind of cool.
Yeah. The last one is loyalty.
Duty and loyalty.
Duty and loyalty, which is chugi. And
I see it's just chew here, but maybe it's a little bit different.
Oh. Well, I just added that last part. No, I'm just joking. According to my research. So this was maybe one of the most important parts. This is that loyalty of what they did. The samurai were known for serving their masters, right? Samurai means literally to serve.
Yeah.
And so that loyalty was important. They treated each other like family and would do everything in their power to protect or help other samurai warriors. Loyalty was important because it meant that you could trust these warriors and that they would be loyal to whatever they needed to do. And it was interesting. I was looking up some of the myths of samurai, and one of the myths of the samurai were that they were all good, that they were all loyal, right? And I think it's kind of like it's probably like any religion, right? Not that this was a particular religion, but it's like anything. You can't say that all Christians are great people, and you can't say that all great people are Christians, right? So there's always a bad batch, right? That kind of can throw a wrench in things.
And if you think about those, there were like warring states, warring for a long time. So, I mean, you're loyal as one leader, but then you want to kill the other person, and so if you have a bad leader, you're going to be a bad.
Yeah, it's interesting. It said samurai were not always loyal, and it said, sorry to destroy your ideal image of the fierce warriors, but often the case is this is reality and not fantasy. It said some of these samurai were as loyal as Tiger Woods at a Thai brothel. I thought that was kind of funny. But it says in the early period of their emergence, this is like in the early part of that 700-year span that we talked about, they were loyal to whoever paid them the most for their services. This was kind of in the days before the Bushido really got developed and everything else. But even during that time period, there were still samurai that was almost like sellswords, right? They were swords for hire, and their allegiance could shift at any time. They weren't always the skilled or extremely moral, loyal force that is associated with them. Their moral fiber depended heavily on what they were paid and by whom. It says it wasn't until the 12th century that the modern image of the samurai began to emerge. And so I just thought it was really kind of interesting that you don't really hear much about. There were certain factions of the samurai that were not as loyal as we would like to think.
Yeah.
But I would say just because you have a couple bad apples doesn't ruin the whole
Well,
pot.
just because that doesn't say anything about the creed, I don't think. Like for example, we believe that, do not commit adultery. How many people believe that but actually do that,
Yeah.
That doesn't say anything about that not being a good ideal, but it just has to do with the imperfectness of man. But to have lofty and noble ideals or goals as part of your creed, I think is always good to help you strive for something better than just being imperfect. I have a really cool story here. Okay, so this is true. Like, have you seen the movie 300?
Yeah.
This is like 300, dude. This is I was so surprised I'd never even heard this before. But this is a big deal in China. And I read the story. Japan, yeah. And I was like, dude, this is awesome. So there was a battle with the Mongols, or called the Mongol Horde. That's what they call it, in 1273. So a long time ago. The Mongols had a massive empire that was 22% of all Earth's landmass that they lorded over. 22% of the entire Earth. Of all the landmass on the entire Earth, this empire ruled over 100 million people. And this is in 1273. Dude, that is a huge empire. At this time, Japan was a divided, warring state of landlords who were just fighting over territory. So the threat of this juggernaut of an army was enough to quell the infighting between some of the warring houses within Japan to face this common enemy. So, if you think about, it's kind of like similar to like Leonidas and his troops, they're like this massive Persian army that just drinks rivers dry, that's coming, and they're like, oh shoot,
our arrows will blot out the sun.
Yeah, exactly. Fight in the shade, right? And so the first invasion came in November of 1274. So the Mongols landed and were met by the samurai. They rode towards the samurai, firing volleys of arrows laced with poison before retreating to stay out of the range of their opponents. 3 waves of attacks continued relentlessly and were combined with use of fire bombs that were probably developed in China and burned not only the samurai warriors but also their mounts. And so the Japanese were forced to fall back into a defensive formation, but the Mongols could not build on their advantage and pursue any further due to a shortage of arrows. So, they came out hot and heavy. And usually samurais, the way they fight, they charge into battle on their horsebacks. But when they're getting volleys of poisonous arrows shot at them, they just didn't know how to defend against this. So the Mongols ran out of arrows and stuff, and they what they did is they reboarded their ships. But because there was it was typhoon season, they lost 13,000 men, and 200 of their 900 ships were lost at sea.
So like the 300 in the storm.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and then the Mongols concentrated on conquering China for a while, and then in 1279, so just 5 years later, they sent more envoys, and demanded the leaders pay homage to the Khan. So I think at this time his name was Kabul Khan, and the Japanese sent the messengers' heads back as the answer. That no, we're not doing this. That's exactly like Spartacus. This is Sparta. He kicks him into the thing, and he, you bring
Leonidas.
Leonidas. He's like, you bring the heads of dead kings,
crowned kings. Yeah,
yeah. And then he says, so the Mongols so Kublai, who was the Khan at the time, the emperor, he was furious and mounted an army over the next few years to attack in 1281. So just 2 years later. And he had 200,000 men bound for Japan. And the Japanese had constructed a 14-foot wall for 25 miles along the coast of the Hakata Bay, which is where they came in last time. They also assembled a large number of small boats, which were able to fight in the shallow waters, because they wanted to keep them. They wanted to keep these guys' forces in their boats.
Yeah,
and you'll see why in a second. And so this massive invasion force of 200,000 people. That's a huge army. The samurai, they started fighting. The samurai were pushed back. Some of these groups, some small groups, were actually able to make landfall on the beaches, but the samurai were actually to keep the majority of the forces in their boats or just out of the bay, and the samurais would attack at night, attack the boats and attack different things at night, which really frustrated the Mongols. And the Mongols returned to their ships only to realize that they made the same mistake they made last time. Another storm hit, and around 4,000 of their ships were sunk. Around 100,000 men died, lost their lives at sea. Isn't that crazy? This forced the fleet to return to China. This is the cool part. The typhoon and the winds were seen as evidence of divine intervention from the gods, and it was called the divine wind, which is known in Japanese as kamikaze.
Really?
And so that's kamikaze. That term sounds familiar, from World War II, the kamikaze pilots. That was their name given to the squadron of pilots who would suicide
bomb.
And so they were the divine wind, and they were seen as the divine wind to turn the tide of the war. So
That's crazy.
I think that is an awesome kind
Twice.
of that's kind of a really cool historic. That's a big deal in Japanese history. I think that's a really cool story about pushing back. Talk about the little guy pushing back the giant behemoth conqueror. Really cool.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. It's just a really cool culture. There a couple of the facts that I had put together was the samurai were highly literate and cultured. The samurai were more than just your very skilled warriors, but they were essentially nobility of their era, and they were very well educated, which was kind of cool. Also, there was also female samurai warriors. Which is kind of cool. Although most, I guess, samurai was strictly a masculine term. There were, the Japanese Bushi class did include women who received the same training in martial arts and strategy as samurai. So there's actually a story about a female samurai named Tomo Gozen, and basically there's the story on her. Basically, it says once that she took home 7 heads in one battle.
Wow.
Which is kind of cool. So in a field that was entirely dominated by men, which was a samurai, she began her life as a concubine and to one of history's most famous daimyo, which is like those lords, right? His name was
feudal lords, yeah.
Lord Minamoto. And basically, Tome, which is this female samurai, went into...
Minamoto Yoritomo? Maybe that was the same one that united...
no, this is Minamoto no Yoshinaka.
Oh, okay.
Basically, she was really good with the bow and arrow and the longsword. And she rode into battle at the head of Yoshinaka's army. And this is the Battle of Yokotagawara, right? In 1181, so 1181. She reportedly collected the head of 7 mounted warriors. Basically, it's the ancient equivalent to, it says, to LeBron James scoring 100 points in an NBA Finals game. That's what it says. Like...
That is so dumb. You cannot equate a warrior fighting in battle to LeBron James scoring goals.
I was like, and maybe they're just talking about the likelihood of something like that happen. It's so extremely rare that it would take a master to be able to do that. But in a separate battle, she went and kind of going along with this whole 300 thing, she led 300 troops in battle against an army of 6,000. And she emerged as one of the 5 survivors of the entire battle. 300 against 6,000. The 300 killed the 6,000, and she was one of 5 survivors. And she rode In another battle, she rode into a pack of 30 soldiers and promptly beheaded the leader in one swift movement. That was another battle that she was in.
That's pretty swift, man.
Yeah.
To take someone's head off in one move.
In one move, and just like she rode her horse just directly into 30 soldiers.
Wow.
So I think it was just kind of cool that there's warriors out there of all kinds.
Well, let me tell you a story about a different one.
Go ahead.
So this guy was born in 1490. His name was Tsukahara Bokuden. He's one of the most prominent figures in samurai history. So over the course of 19 duels and 37 battles, Bokuden went completely undefeated, garnering reputation as the most deadly samurai during the Warring States period. After being given special permission from his daimyo, Bokuden went on a pilgrimage to seek out the best teachers to learn from and to challenge the best samurai warriors Japan had to offer. In total, he had 37 duels against the best fighters around and set himself on the path to becoming a samurai legend by defeating all who stood before him. Once the pilgrimage was over, he went back to his service of his daimyo and once again served in his army until, at the age of 37, he was allowed to settle down and open up his own Japanese samurai school called the Shinto Ryu. There, he put his unique abilities with the samurai sword to good use and developed his own style called single cut style. I want to learn that style.
It only takes one cut.
That's right. So he had a major change of heart as he got older, and where it became more about not necessarily. He focused more on not being defeated as opposed to fighting. And in his 50s, Bokuden became convinced that the true challenge was settling disputes without combat. In one famous tale, Bokuden reportedly incurred the wrath of a young samurai while traveling on a boat. Apparently, the young man was boasting about, I'm the greatest samurai there ever was. Look at this sword. And this Bokuden guy was just sitting there chilling, and he wasn't like impressed. He wasn't like, ooh, ah. And then so the young man challenged him, and it says the young man noticed how unmoved Bokuden was and enraged him. And not knowing who he was dealing with, he challenged the old master to a duel. Bokuden told him, "My art is different from yours. It consists not so much in defeating others, but in not being defeated." I thought that was kind of cool. That's something you read straight out of like Art of War, you know? Yeah. And so when Bokuden attempted to explain the virtue of solving arguments without violence, the young samurai insisted that the boat captain pull to the nearest island so he and Bokuden could duel. When the boat docked and the young samurai jumped out, Bokuden simply grabbed the boat's reins and led it into deeper waters, stranding the young samurai and laughing as he left, shouting, "Here is my no-sword school." So in 1571, at the age of 83, this great samurai legend died.
Wow.
So,
that's old for
it is old.
That time period.
1571. Pretty crazy, right?
Yeah. Interesting. So I had wanted to talk briefly about the seppuku, which is the ritual suicide that samurais perform. Basically, when talking about Bushido, which is that ethical system or belief code that they live by, if a samurai felt that he had lost honor, according to the rules of Bushido, he could regain his standing by committing a rather painful form of ritual suicide called seppuku. Basically, it was an elaborate process, but seppuku was an act of ritual suicide by disembowelment, seen as a respected and honorable alternative to dishonor and defeat. Seppuku, which is the ritual suicide, could either be a punishment or a voluntary act performed by a samurai if he failed to follow Bushido or faced capture by the enemy. So that's why we're talking about the 47 Ronin. At the beginning, those Ronin that went back and killed the person, I guess maybe that and their whole family that had killed his master or whatever. The story goes that they all committed this seppuku, this ritual suicide at the same time. As kind of because they broke the laws of Bushido.
So is it kind of you said it's a way for them to that's more honorable than getting captured?
Yeah, it's kind of to regain their armor, or their honor
for like the next life or something, or for like the afterlife or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's more of just not so that you don't die or you don't lose that specific honor, because I mean I guess that's one of the highest things that they hold is that honor, and if they lose in war or whatever else, and maybe it had to do with the afterlife, I'm not sure.
Was that a thing in the Roman Empire? Because I watched, what was that one show that we watched about the Romans, and the guy ends up the one legion commander ends up killing himself like that.
Maybe, yeah, I
He
do
was
remember
so
that.
dishonored.
Yeah, I do.
Because his son turned against him. What
Yeah.
was the name of that? Was the name of that show Rome?
Oh, I can't remember. It was a good show.
That was a good show. It was on Netflix.
But
they did this in World War II as well, right?
Yeah, so there was even in World War II some of the after major defeats, some of the generals and the high-ranking officers would perform this ritual suicide, or this seppuku. I guess there's two forms of it. There's one form that's kind of like a long form that's done ritualistic, like at home, and there's like this whole washing ceremony, and then the person gets to eat their last meal, their favorite meal, and it kind of is just this long, drawn-out process. But there's also a separate form that is saved for war and for like the battlefield. And basically, I kind of looked into it, and without getting too extremely detailed, they have they have their long katana, right, and then they have a short sword,
A Tanto sword.
Yeah, well, I don't know, I can't remember the name of it, but basically, they use this short sword to pierce from left to right. I think they stick it in their stomachs, right, and they disembowel themselves.
Mm-hmm. That wouldn't kill you immediately, though.
No, and then after that is done, then a friend or respected person decapitates you.
Really?
Yeah. So, that is how the ritual is performed. Which
Weird. That's weird, man.
I don't know if I quite agree with that, but
it's like why would that be honorable to be killed like that?
I guess it's just.
Maybe you're like, I can kill myself worse than my enemy can do to me. I don't know.
Yeah, or if you don't live the code, then it's like, instead of, and maybe it's like I dish out my own punishment. Right?
I'm so honorable that I am so honorable that I dishonored myself. I killed myself.
Yeah, it's like I realized that I did something bad. I'm punishing myself. It's almost like I'm paying the debt myself.
Yeah.
And so I guess, I don't know, it's just really interesting, and different cultures have different things.
Well, that's like when we talked about the Nazis and Stalingrad, and Hitler was like, no field general has ever, he told the guy, no field general has ever survived combat or has ever, given up in combat. And he made the guy a field general, and he's like, you expect me just to kill myself, or like,
yeah.
And he's like, I'm not going to do that. And he was branded as a coward for not killing himself. So that's so interesting. Well, if you ever watch the movie Midway, actually that movie's really good, because I think it's, and maybe I'm not Japanese, so I don't know, but I don't think it like puts such a negative light on the Japanese. It doesn't demonize the Japanese as much as like Pearl Harbor does. Like the movie Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
It kind of just shows them and their tacticalness, and then like one of the ships gets damaged, and the guy goes out and he's like, I'm the captain of the ship. I'm going down with the ship. And so he just stays on the ship and he dies with the ship. So I think that there's that sense of honor that Bushido that kind of held over even into World War II and possibly to this day. But I feel like that movie did a fair for both sides, in fact. War is war. And depending on what side you want to look at it, I mean.
One thing that I've always been extremely impressed with is that, I mean, the size of Japan is really not that large.
No, it's tiny.
I mean, it's. I mean, they have a decent population, but as compared to like, China and everything. I mean, I know there's been lots of bouts between Japan and China, and they hold their own. I mean, it's really interesting. But
there's some big issues right now with North Korea keeps launching missiles over to Japan and dropping stuff in their international waters, and then China keeps building islands that are like encroaching on, Taiwan and also Japan. There's a bunch of conflict right there, man. It has been for thousands and thousands of years. Sounds like.
Yeah, that's true.
But
maybe all they need is a big storm.
yeah, the kamikaze.
They need a kamikaze.
But this has been a great episode. This has been really cool to look at Bushido, the 7 virtues, and I like a lot of these virtues. I can't disagree with anything. Integrity, respect, heroic courage, honor, compassion, honesty, sincerity, duty, and loyalty. I can't disagree with any of those. Those are all very noble.
If any of those are part of your personal creed, then I think you're doing pretty good.
Yeah, so it's awesome to kind of look at different cultures and see what they have and kind of adopt those into your own personal creed. So
cool. Well, this has been great. Thanks for listening, and we hope that you can implement some of the 7 virtues of Bushido into your own personal creed.
That's right. Let's build our creed together.
Okay, let's do it.